Stephanie Henschel for the state. May it please the court. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. A park was robbed, a man escaped, and the defendant was behind it all. On August 30th, 2012, Rockdale World Amusement Park was robbed. The accountant at the park was threatened at knife point, and a park security officer was slammed into one of the rides. And he's still in a coma today. Today we learned that it was the defendant's friend who used Whit Bowman's knife to go up to that ticket booth and rob the park that day. It was the defendant's friend who escaped through a ride called the Tunnel of Terror, the same ride that the defendant was working on August 30th. They want you to believe that what happened on August 30th was simply a series of mistakes. But we know today that it was the defendant who made a series of choices, not mistakes. Because it was the defendant who was behind that scheme to sell fake wristbands over the summer of 2012. It was the defendant who was behind the exchange of the knife given to Cameron Poole for that robbery. And it was the defendant who was behind the controls of that ride when Cameron Poole escaped. A park was robbed, a man escaped, and the defendant was behind it all. Now, as the state in today's case, we had the burden of proof. We had to prove to you today, beyond a reasonable doubt, not that the defendant's friend was the one who robbed the ticket booth, and not that the defendant's friend was the one who was handing out fake wristbands. But today we came before you to prove that it was the defendant who was behind those crimes. You see, the law defines something called complicity. That simply means that when another person helps another person plan or commit a crime, they have to be held just as responsible as the person doing it. And that's what we came to prove to you today. Because it was the defendant who helped Cameron Poole commit that theft by deception. In the ticket booth when Cameron Poole was handing out fake wristbands, pocketing some of the park's profit. That's what the law calls theft by deception, when you intentionally take someone else's money. It has to be an amount more than $500. Now think about what we've proven to you today. You heard the detective. Over the summer of 2012, the park lost over $67,000. And the defendant admitted that he was involved in helping Cameron Poole commit this crime. And he came up here saying that he was going to take responsibility for it. But then when I asked him specific details, he tried to make excuses. He first wanted to admit to it, but then when asked about what he actually did, well, he didn't want to take responsibility for it. But we know today that those were wristbands that he and Cameron Poole used. He was behind that scheme. He knew exactly what Cameron Poole was doing, and as a ride operator, he allowed those people on the rides. The people with the fake wristbands, he let them on the rides, and he knew that the park was losing money. By knowing and by not saying anything, that is helping someone commit a crime. That is complicity, and so we've proven to you today, beyond a reasonable doubt, that it was the defendant who committed theft by deception. Let's talk about the second charge that we brought before you today. That's robbery in the first degree. Now, robbery is simple. It's when you threaten someone, it's when you use force, and you take money from them. That's robbery. Think about what happened on August 30th. Cameron Poole goes up to the ticket booth, threatens the accountant, robs the accountant. Officer Thomas is injured in the chase, and Cameron Poole escapes. Now, again, we don't have to prove that it was Whit Bowman who was actually holding the knife on August 30th. We don't have to prove that it was Whit Bowman who used force or threatened Haley Floyd or the park security officer. We just have to prove that it was the defendant who was behind that robbery, the defendant who helped Cameron Poole commit this crime. Think back to what happened on August 30th. It started with a knife. Tyler Hartman told you today that just a couple weeks before the robbery, she saw the defendant giving Cameron Poole a knife. Put it in a locker. It's here when you need it. Here's a little insurance policy for you. We heard from the defense's own witness, Charlie Kaminsky, of the very first person that Cameron Poole called after this robbery happened was the defendant. What did Cameron Poole say? I used your knife, but I got rid of it. No one will know that you had anything to do with this. But we know that the defendant had everything to do with this, because on August 30th, the defendant didn't take over the ride, the Tunnel of Terror, by mistake. We learned today that it was the defendant who was responsible for operating rides on this end of the park. But you heard Billy Isaacs today. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 8 different times the defendant walked all the way across the park to ask, hey, can I take over your ride? Can I take over your ride? And at 8 o'clock, just moments before this robbery occurred, it was the defendant who got behind the controls of that ride. They want you to believe that on August 30th, when he pulled a lever, put the ride in blackout mode, that it was a mistake, that he didn't mean to help Cameron Poole get away. But think back to what Billy Isaacs said. Think back to what the defendant told you. He's worked the Tunnel of Terror before. He told you he started that ride, he stopped that ride, he knew exactly where the buttons were to stop and to start. And on August 30th, he made a choice to pull that lever, to put that ride into blackout mode. That's when Officer Thomas was injured. That's when Cameron Poole escaped. When the defendant was behind the controls, he made a conscious choice to help Cameron Poole get away with this robbery. That's complicity. And that's why we've proven to you today beyond a reasonable doubt that it was the defendant who helped Cameron Poole commit this crime. These weren't a series of mistakes. Think back to the text messages that the defendant received from Cameron Poole just minutes after this robbery occurred. Cameron Poole says, I'm out. Talk to you later. Thanks. Cameron Poole thanked the defendant for helping him escape. The defendant was involved in that crime. Those were not a series of mistakes that he made. Those were a series of choices that he made to help Cameron Poole commit these crimes. Now, they want to talk about how things got out of control on August 30th because there was a gunshot. But on August 30th, when the defendant talked to the police, well, he started lying. He said, well, I didn't know Cameron Poole. Cameron Poole wasn't my friend. I never heard a gunshot. So which is it? He either heard a gunshot or he didn't hear a gunshot. And when are we supposed to believe him? These were not mistakes. These were a series of choices that he made because on August 30th, when that park was robbed, when his friend escaped, he was behind it all. And that's why we ask that you find the defendant guilty of both crimes.